Hello. In this tutorial, we're going to look through some of the new ray tracing and path tracing features in Notch and how to use them, and what's available, and a couple of best practices. So we've got a simple scene here, just a box and a sphere and a plane, a cube. And in the root node, ray tracing has been enabled. So if you check that one off, you can see ray tracing has been turned on. And if we look at the basic lights first on the left here, we've got an omni light here, and the shadow type has been set to ray traced. So if we turn that back to PCF, you can see the difference. Like with the shadow map, you get a blurry shadow, slightly rough shadow. Ray traced is super sharp. And if we bump up the shadow softness here, you can see that you quickly get a smooth shadow. And ray tracing makes that very accurate. If we look at the other light types, so we've got our omni light, we've got area lights. So area lights with shadows. So area lights without ray tracing can't cast shadows, but thanks to ray tracing, they can. And you can see they've got the sharp specular reflection there. Then we also have skylights. You see the skylights with ray tracing. So if we turn ray tracing off. Without ray tracing, we get a diffuse, blurry look. And with ray tracing, specular and specular glossy reflections work, and the general look is much more accurate and clean. You notice that I'm moving around everything that's noisy until you stop and settle. And that's because we're doing a limited number of rays per frame. So to make the frame time always reasonable and interactive. And then over frames, we refine it. This is quite common in many similar kind of renderers. And this can be controlled here. So with this tool button, the refine render button, which controls Shift R toggles. And without it turned on, everything's always noisy. It never refines. But with it on, when you stop and settle, the image refines. You can see the refine steps are listed down here. So we start at 1, and they quickly, rapidly move up as the image refines. You can see the time taken there as well. At any point, we can toggle ray tracing on and off. So just pop it off. We'll go back to the original conventional rasterizing renderer, pop it back on, and we're ray tracing. So this is great for if you need to quickly work at a higher frame rate or do some editing. We don't need ray tracing. Just pop it off, do your editing, and turn it back on when you want to go back to look dev. So let's look at some of the new ray tracing nodes in Notch. So firstly here we have the RT mirror reflection node. So we pop that on. You'll notice that before that was turned on, what the skylight was giving you was a reflection of the environment through one single hit. So where the environment can be seen directly, you get a reflection. But anywhere where it's hitting geometry, you just got black. So there's a black area of shadow there because it's hitting the cube. So when we turn on the mirror reflection, we're getting that it's actually hitting the cube and giving you a mirror look. So the mirror reflection has no roughness support. It does a single bounce. This makes it kind of suitable for real time. If I turn off the skylight and use the Omni, you can see that that's a completely viable real time scene. It's running in just 5 milliseconds. So that's all a real time rendered scene. With the skylight, obviously there's some roughness introduced. There's some noisiness introduced from the diffuse pass that gives you the need to refine. We can actually control on the light which passes are being used. So I can turn off the diffuse and just do a specular reflection from the skylight. And similarly turn off the specular just to get a diffuse pass. So back to the ray tracing nodes. The mirror reflection is the first one. And this one was already present in 0.9.22, so you might have already tried it out. So let's look at the next one on the list, the multi-bounce reflection. And this is very similar to the mirror, but it has multiple reflection bounces. So by default, we're only doing 1 bounce, but it can go up to 4, multiple. You can go as many as you like. And so if you, in this case, you can see I've got a, if I have 1 reflection bounce, you can see that the sphere is reflecting the box, which is reflecting the sphere. And with 1 bounce, I only get the first hit. So by adding 2, you can see that that changes the result. And you actually see the reflection of the box in the reflection of the sphere in the box. You see what I mean? So multi-bounces starts becoming important. With the mirror reflection, you don't get that. So the multi-bounce reflection extends the mirror reflection to handle multiple bounces. It also supports roughness, so we can now do you can do rough reflections here. My box, you can see I'm bringing the roughness, which again the mirror does not support. So I've got a blurry reflection now because my things are rough. With the mirror, it's always sharp. 0 there. The next one along, the RT bounce, the RT diffuse bounce. So we hide the multi-bounce reflection and bring in the diffuse bounce. This is doing a multiple bounce diffuse only lighting. So diffuse shapes will be, you see this on the ground. You'll see you're getting a light bleeding from the, turn it off. You see there's no bleeding from the shape from the orange box. With it on, you're getting a bit of a bleed. If you bump up that massively high, you'll see what effect that's having. See, everything's getting light bounces and bleeds from everything else. So the diffuse bounce nodes, the diffuse bounce is really great for light map baking because you can only bake diffuse lighting anyway because it all has to be view independent. So using the RT diffuse bounce node is a really great solution for light map baking. Now we have the RT ambient occlusion node. This is kind of like a skylight with no env map applied, but it can be controlled to see how you apply it to the scene and blend it in and out. So you can bring it in, blend it, and multiply it on top of other lighting for where you need to bump up your bump up the contrast in the creases. Got a radius control here, so you can make a very short, sharp fall off on your ambient occlusion. So this is kind of like another lighting pass. Then we've got the glass. We need a glass node here. So if I change the box to a glass material, which I'll come to later, you can see that with the glass refraction node, we handle a kind of real-time viable glass effect. It has its limitations. It only handles, it doesn't handle overlapping objects. So it's usable in a limited but real-time suitable set of use cases for where you really need some real-time glass. And because glass rays, if they're not rough, don't particularly need to be refined unless there's anything else that's rough in the scene, then you can often get away with no refinement. So you can use this in real time. So finally, we have the path tracing node. The path tracing node unifies all of the other effects. So it handles multiple bounces of reflection, diffuse, and refraction and glass, all in one node, and everything's balanced. So this is really the node to give you the sort of renderers that approach photoreal. The path tracing node has a few controls here. So we've got controls over the bounce depth of each kind of node, each kind of interaction. So with just one bounce, you only get the like the sky reflection. As we bump this up, so the more bounces, the slower it gets, but the more accurate ultimately you'll get. Of course, if you don't need the extra bounces, you don't need the extra bounces. You can see that on the ground here, you're getting the effect of rays bouncing through glass and getting almost caustic effects on the ground. So Pathtracer is really capable of very high quality rendering, but with a performance impact, although in this case we're running quite well. See the effect on different materials. Now let's look at some of the material options here. So I've got the ball at the moment has got a normal material on it. If we switch that from metallic material, you see I get a very metallic ball. Glass. This is all done with the see the glass. We have separate materials for these different types for easy setup. And the substance material, you can use substance for these. And they support roughness maps and metallicness maps and so on. Works really well. And one other option here, we've talked about lighting using sky domes and various kinds of lights. We can also now light with emissive objects. So I've got a sphere here. It's got an emissive material on it. And just by popping that in the scene, as long as the path tracer or the diffuse bounce node is active. So if I only had the metallic node active, nothing would be happening apart from one reflection. With the path tracer or the diffuse bounce node, we can pick up lighting from emissive objects. You can see that this is actually capable of lighting the scene. The only problem with emissives is that you need an awful lot of refines to get the image to go not noisy. But there's some tremendous possibilities here. As you can imagine. So any mesh can now be a light. But this conveniently brings us on to denoising, because we've got a very noisy image here. So we've talked about the need to refine. And by default, we just get 1,000 iterations. That happens over time. You can control this with the RT refinement node. And this one lets you control the number of denoising, so the number of refinement steps. So if I want to limit it to just 10 steps, say, then you can limit it accordingly, and it will clamp out that number. There's some other options in this node. We've got some filtering controls. So if you check on the filtering, you can actually start applying some like post-blurring effectively to the various passes, which is can be useful just to smooth out that last bit of noise. Not particularly useful at 100 iterations in this case, but it can be very useful in other scenarios. We also have we've integrated a couple of industry standard denoisers into the mix, and there are two that are available right now. The first one, if we check on AI denoising, the first one is the Intel OIDN standard denoiser. So if you watch this run, as soon as we get to 100 steps, pop, it does the denoising. This is using AI to do the denoiser. So someone has magically trained AI to know how to take a noisy image into its refined state. It's not perfect. It will bleed. It will occasionally blur stuff out. It won't look exactly like a real, like fully refined image with 100,000 steps, but the time is an awful lot lower, so it makes it very appealing. Pop. There you go. If you want to improve the quality of the denoiser, give it more bounce, give it more steps, give it more refines. The less noisy an image it has to work with, the better job it does. See if I give this only one refine. You can see that's why I get a one refine. It's not quite as pretty. Often between around 20 to say 100 steps is normally sufficient to get a really good quality result. And then we have the optics denoiser as well. And this one runs actually on real time on the GPU. This one has some other challenges, but it's completely interactive, so everything works as I move around. Again, it really needs lots of passes to look good, to look really good. But this one, it's completely real-time dynamic on the GPU. Certain scenes will work well with this, and certain scenes won't. The OIDN denoiser at the moment is using normals, so it has a little bit more tolerance. It works a little bit better on more scenes. But the optics denoiser is improving really quickly. And we think within not too long, they should be up to the same level, and the optics denoiser is real time, so it's just fantastic. Pop that off for now. Now we're going to look at some of the anti-aliasing options here. So you've got the standard options, so FXAA is on at the moment. And let's stop using the light. So FXAA, and so with no anti-aliasing at all, we get what we'd expect, like a noisy, jaggedy render, very jaggedy render. You can still use root node anti-aliasing if you check that on. The issue with this is twofold. Firstly, it only handles the edges of geometry, and when we introduce ray tracing, a lot of the noise will come from ray aliasing. It will come from sharp highlights getting reflected and refracted. And anti-aliasing in the root node just handles edges which have no ability to know anything about ray anti-aliasing. The other thing is it makes it a lot slower. So you can see this is now running about 25 milliseconds. If I pop that off, it's running at 14. So it not quite doubles the frame time just for edge anti-aliasing. So for ray tracing, it's not recommended. With FXAA anti-aliasing, which is a post-process, it generally works very well. It does blur things out a little bit. And we also have temporal AA, and temporal AA actually works pretty well. You can see it handles edges really well, but it does smear noise a bit. So if you've got a noisy image that you're working with, it can be quite noticeable. And there's one other option as well. So if you hide the temporal, if you go to the RT refinement node, there's an option to use full screen anti-aliasing. And what this does is it uses the refine passes. So it generates AA using the individual refine passes. So over refine pass, you can see as I move, I've got a noisy image, I've got aliased image. I let go, it quickly refines. It gives me a really smooth image. And this is the ideal solution for static images in particular. So we've got one other denoiser to look at. If we turn this one off, we've got the real-time, the RT denoiser, the real-time denoiser. And what this does, it's just suitable for real-time, and it uses multiple frames to accumulate a result and reproject it between frames. Again, this is not perfect. Works pretty well for diffuse and quite poorly for speculars. You can see the smearing as I move around. It's like slowly smearing it out. But it's real time. It doesn't require multiple frames of refining to work. It will give you a result pretty much straight away, and particularly for diffuse heavy scenes and so on. It does a pretty good job. So when you need it, if you need to be real time, that's the way to go for any denoising options. Finally, let's look at some of the other things we can do. So all the sort of standard notch things that still work with this. So we can do clones. I've got a couple of clones of glass here. We can do multiple shapes with refraction. We can do we can clone some objects. Let's see. So we can do lots of all the kind of same things that we'd normally do. All just kind of work. Let's pull that off. Actually, let's pop that one on. So cloners. Cloners just work as you'd expect. So the particles. Clone to particles. So you can see particles and so on all just work as you'd expect. So you've got full access to the whole notch toolkit here, and procedurals as well. See, everything is as you'd hope procedurals, particles, clones, and everything else is all there and available for you. So hopefully that's given you a good tour of some of the features available in the new ray tracing release. Thank you very much.